Hey everybody, Onepeg here. We've got a lot to get through with this guide video because I want to do Gunsmiths 10 through 16 to make this a short 3-part series. So we're just going to kind of jump right into it. First things first, Gunsmith 10. Gunsmith 10 is an AK-105 build that requires you to have an 800 sighting range, ergonomics above 48, a recoil sum less than 550, and the gun must have a weight of less than 4.8 kilograms and 8 cells, compact, which means that the gun has to be folded. In addition, it must also be suppressed and have a 60-round mag. So as always, whenever it comes to stuff like this, when you're trying to make weight, make sure that the mag is empty. In order to be able to start this task, you have to be level 20, which means that the only real pitfalls that you have here is the foregrip and possibly the magazine. Now, the mag is Prapper level 2 and is something that you can barter for. There are a few different ways to build this, mainly coming down to that of the handguard more than anything. The pitfalls here, given that if you're trying to do this around level 20, would be the RK3 pistol grip, the handguard and foregrip combo, and of course the 60-round mag. The rest of this stuff is basically all vendored from either Peacekeeper, Skier, or Prapper, all level 2 and below. And really your only hang-up in this case is the ergonomics requirement. So with this being ergonomics of 54, it's actually pretty overkill for the ergonomics requirement of 48. Which means that if you wanted to make this a little bit less expensive, you can actually get away with using an SB15 and a butt pad to get yourself over the 48 ergo requirement. And even folded, this will come in underneath the required recoil. Now, one thing that I would mention is it does require a suppressor, so the DT Mountain Hybrid 46, again, is your best bet in terms of the minimization of ergo penalty. Since BSG has made the changes that they did, you don't really have to worry so much about the recoil requirements. It's really down to ergo. Now, instead of using the Mo AKM handguard and the M-Lock grip that I have shown here, you do have the option of instead using a B10 M4 grip and rail mount B19 combo and using a KAC vertical pistol grip instead to make the 48. And this build also will still come in. Now, the KAC pistol grip is something that you can get at level 1 for Peacekeeper, so that's not really an issue. It's really going to come down to this B10M. But as of the date of this video, all of these parts that I have listed, if you're unable to get them from the traders, are now pretty cheap off of other players that have been listing things on the flea market. So this build, as it sits right here, shouldn't be that bad. Now, the rewards for this are actually a pair of ammo cases. So depending on your needs, you could sell one and keep the other, or keep them both if you choose. But really the larger benefit is the Colt M4 soap mod that is the task reward in this case, which looks very similar to the soap mod M4 that you can get off of Mechanic right here. All right, on to Gunsmith Part 11. Gunsmith 11 is an AS Val build, and there's really no getting around an awful lot of these parts because most of the stuff that's listed on this is required. However, there is a little bit of a hang-up. In this case, there's still an ongoing bug with the AS Val, the base AS Val, that will bug the gun if you leave the gun folded. So in this case, depending on the gun that you start with, you need to make sure that the base stock of the AS Val is unfolded before you assemble the gun. Because even though you might change it to a tube stock, the gun will still be listed as folded, which means you'll still get the folded recoil stats. And when you go to hand the gun in, it won't work. Now in this case, most of the parts that are on this, like I said, are required. So things like the GL shock stock, the PEQ-15 tactical device, the NSPU night scope, and the 30-round SR3M magazine are all requirements to have to be on the gun. And unfortunately, in this case, even though the requirement for the task itself is level 20, that also means that the required parts are a little bit harder to get. Because the PEQ isn't obtainable until Peacekeeper level 3, which you can get, even though you're only level 20. The GL shock stock isn't cash purchasable until Skier level 4, nor is the 30-round SR3M mag, because that's Prapper level 4. You can barter for it at Prapper level 3, but at level 20, you won't have that yet, which means that, unfortunately, if you want to do this early, you have to kind of go to the flea market. But again, the saving grace in this case is that most of these parts are now a little bit less expensive, being that we're now a month into the wipe, so it shouldn't be all that bad. With the one exception of the SR3M magazine, especially now that the AS Val and its associated ammo have gotten pretty much a global buff across the board, thank you, Nikita, as of today, the SR3Ms are probably going to be a little bit more expensive now. So the unfortunate reality is the vast majority of this build is built just like this. The only thing that I haven't mentioned that you will need is a B3 mount, but that's pretty easy to get since that's Skier level 3. And if you're not at skier level 3 yet, that's really, really cheap off of the flea market. No one really cares about that item whatsoever. I wish I had something better for you in this case, but your hands are more or less tied. Just make sure that the gun isn't folded and you should be fine. Oh, and make sure that the mag is empty, of course. Anyway, on to Gunsmith 12. Gunsmith 12 is an AK-102 build, which is one of the 5.56 variants of AKs that exist. The easiest way to get yourself an AK-102 at level 23 or below, as is the requirement for this task, is to kill Reshala and loot one off of his body. And, well, hopefully he has one for you to be able to loot. Now, in this case, the requirement is 50 or more ergonomics, 500 or less recoil, 500 or greater sighting range, which just means you just have to have irons. It must be 8 or fewer cells in size, a rotor 43 muzzle brake, a Magpul AFG grip OD, and a Zenit 2U Klesh tactical flashlight. Now, in my case, I did actually get this off of Reshala, which is why you see that there's the Bastion dust cover on it. In this case, you don't have to have the Bastion. You can use a stock one, but I opted to use the one that I had in my inventory as opposed to going to the flea market and obtaining one that way. Now, as always, based on the size of the gun, you need to make sure that when you hand it in, you have the stock folded. The polymer stock is good enough. You don't even have to have a butt pad for it. And if you notice on this build, it does not have a magazine in it. There is no requirement for a magazine. And in fact, given the way that the build is set up, if you tried to hand the gun in with a mag in it, even if you were over the ergo requirement, it still would not be something you could hand in. So in this case, you need to make sure that there's no mag in the gun. The only really weird curveball with this build is this AFG olive drab grip, which you can't get until you get to mechanic level 3, and you also can't get until you finish this task that unlocks the ability for you to be able to buy it. So the only way to get an OD grip is to find one in raid or to purchase it yourself off of the flea market. So the AFG grip is going to run you somewhere around 32 to 34,000 rubles, depending on the day and when you find it. The Zenit 2U flashlight is going to run you somewhere around 31k, and the Rotor 43 is going to run you somewhere around 60. So all in, this build, if you tried to do it at level 23, is going to end up costing you somewhere around 120,000 rubles, plus the cost of the gun if you didn't loot it yourself. Okay, on to Gunsmith 13. Gunsmith 13 is an MPX build that again has some of those required parts that you can't really get around. In this case, the required parts are a skeletonized AR-15 pistol grip, the Annihilator flash hider, and a LazTac 2 tactical flashlight. Now, this build is based off of a standard MPX build that you can get right off of Peacekeeper level 2. The problem with the LazTac flashlight being included on this build is that you can't purchase one until you finish Gunsmith 14, which we aren't on yet, which again means that it's something that you have to find on the flea market or find attached to a weapon in a different part of your travels. Now, you have to be level 25 to start this task, which means that if you start this task at the earliest possible time that you have available to you, that means that you don't have Skier level 3 unlocked yet. And in doing so means that you can't barter for the skeletonized AR-15 pistol grip. At this point in time, you also don't have access to mechanic level 3, so you can't get the skeletonized AR-15 pistol grip off of a TX-15 trade that he has available either. So then obviously, one then turns to the flea market. In my case, even though this was available to me at level 25, I opted to wait until I got to level 30 so that I could make the trade with Skier, because the trade itself is incredibly inexpensive. And quite honestly, the skeletonized pistol grips didn't even exist on the flea market at the time that I was trying to find them. And even now, you can't find one on the flea whatsoever. So your best bet is really to wait until level 30 and then just do the trade, either by bartering it with Skier or bartering for a TX-15 so that you can get one from mechanic that would include the pistol grip. Now, just like Gunsmith 12, the skeletonized pistol grip in this case is another one of those items that you're not going to be able to purchase for cash until after you finish this task, which would unlock the pistol grip from mechanic. But again, you can't see it until mechanic level 3, so you're just better off getting level 30 and then doing it that way and bartering for it from Skier for cheap. Once you hit level 30, the barter for the AR-15 pistol grip is 1 vase and 3 chainlets. So if you're at this point and you're not level 30 yet, what I would do is spend a little bit of time over the next handful of levels or so just getting acquainted with trying to find that loot. Hit some safes, find some stuff in marked rooms, see if you can get yourself a vase. All else fails, by the time you get to level 30, once you're able to barter for this from Skier, you can always purchase those items off of the flea market. And yeah, it might cost a little bit, but at least you'll be able to advance yourself. Now, the rewards for this task are a little bit lackluster. You get about 500 USD and a Vendetta Precision muzzle brake, and 19,000 experience. So if you're doing this at level 30, it gives you about an eighth of a level. Nothing really amazing, but I suppose it's better than getting nothing for the task. And hey, you're one step closer to finishing the series, right? Anyway, on to Gunsmith 14. Gunsmith 14 requires an AKMN, which is purchasable from Prepper level 3 for 48,000 rubles. Now, you have to be level 27 to start this task, which means that if you don't have access to Prepper, you can always pick one up off of the flea market. And there are options that include, basic grips and stuff that you don't necessarily need that will end up getting replaced anyway for slightly less expensive than what Prepper will sell it for. But for the sake of ease, I'm just going to grab the Prepper one and we'll go from there. Now, because this requires an AKMN, make sure that you're using the AKMN stock preset. The overarching theme for this Mo AKM build is that it is using Mo AKM parts that are black. So you need to make sure that you're using the black colored parts. If you're not using the black colored parts, the Mo build will fail. Now, if you notice, some of these parts, like this one says black in parentheses, whereas this one does not. Now, this black grip is the actual black grip, even though it doesn't say black in parentheses. The standard base one in this case is black, so don't get fooled by that. This also calls for an ME adapter and standard tube stock, but the build ends up looking something a little bit like this. Now, just a couple quick items of note. You don't need to put a butt pad on this gun. The way that this is built will fit the ergonomics requirement just fine. If you notice, we're at 48.5 ergo, which is 1.5 points over. We don't have to worry about folding the gun in this case because there's no folding it with the ME adapter. The only thing we have to make sure of is that the PMAG is empty. Other than that, we can just assemble it. Now, the only thing that might be a little bit of a pitfall here for people that don't want to pay for it on the flea market is this Rotor 43. Now, the Rotor 43 is a barterable item from Mechanic Level 3 and costs 2 magnets on trade. The rest of these items are either obtainable from Peacekeeper level 2 or Skier level 3. If you waited until level 30, you shouldn't have an issue being able to get any or all of these parts from the traders. So we're going to save, we're going to buy our parts, and we'll hit assemble. We simply go over to Mechanic and hand it in. Look, did it with you. Might as well take care of 15 while we're at it, right? Gunsmith 15 is an M1A build. This unlocks the ability for you to buy the M1A SAS for cash, so it's not a bad reward. Now, this build begins by starting off with the standard M1A that you can get from Peacekeeper level 3 that costs 777 US dollars. It requires an M14 Ultimac M8 upper, a Night Force rifle scope, an Aimpoint Micro T1, and a Holosun LS321 tactical device. Now, this also means that you have to have at least 20 or more ergo with 400 or less recoil, but both of those really shouldn't be that difficult to obtain with this. The Ultimac, the Night Force rifle scope, and the 34mm rings are all barter items from Mechanic and Jaeger level 2. But in order to meet the recoil requirement, this means that we have to have a 22-inch barrel. But this is obtainable from Mechanic level 3, so again, if you had leveled yourself up to level 30, you should have Mechanic level 3 available. Especially if you've been doing all of these tasks, your rep should be fantastic. Now, for this, we add the UTG-4 that's obtainable from Mechanic level 3 as well for our cash. We're going to swap out the stock for the Archangel stock, which is also purchasable from Mechanic level 3. We're going to add the Ultimac M8 to the top. In this case, I have the 34mm mag mount by IEA Mill Optics unlocked from Jaeger level 3, so I can just buy those for cash. Add my Night Force rifle scope. Place my Aimpoint Micro T1 with my AMM base. Place an X3 compensator on the front and an LS321 on the bottom. Now, this comes in at 28 ergo. It obviously meets the sighting range requirements and everything else that is needed. The only real hang-up in this case, because I don't have Jaeger level 4 unlocked, is the Night Force scope, which is a Jaeger level 2 trade. But luckily, I have the Jaeger level 2 trade, so we can just go snag that. Now, the trade for Jaeger requires a power bank, 2 magnets, and 1 ultraviolet lamp. And here's our rifle scope. So we move our way over to our M1A for Gunsmith 15, buy our vendored parts, and put her together. One thing to make sure that you look out for in this case is don't pay for the Ultimac M8 with cash. Especially if you've been following this guide series, you know that we got to level 30 already for the MPX build. So in this case, paying 144k for an Ultimac is crazy. It's a barter trade for 3 circuit boards from Mechanic. Get this thing from Mechanic for the 3 circuit boards instead. Okay? So we go grab our M1A Gunsmith 15, assemble it, and we hand this thing in. Done. Okay, and now for Gunsmith 16, which is kind of like the coup de grace of this whole thing, and ends up being the vastly most expensive build of this entire series. Luckily, it's the last one. Now, this is the mother of all M4 builds, and is going to end up costing you a pretty penny no matter what you do. It unfortunately requires you to use a Reaper. It also requires a KAC QDSS NT4 and the Handguard MK10. Now, the rest of this build is really nothing at all. It all is more or less cash, except for the Magpul PMag, because it requires a 60-round PMag, and obviously the Reap IR. So to make the requirements, this is what we need to do. We're going to put on a PDW stock. It also requires an MUR 1S upper. Luckily, it doesn't require anything other than the 370mm standard barrel, but we do need an MK12 low-profile gas block, the MK10, that, again, we're required to include, the Grawl S for Ergo, the KAC QDC compensator to go along with our suppressor, which is the NT4 FDE. Please make sure that you're using the NT4 FDE, as it has to be the FDE compensator, our Magpul 60-round PMag, a Raptor charge handle for the required Ergo, our D-lock mount, and the Reap IR. One thing of note, in order to be able to make the ergonomics requirement, given the changes that BSG recently made, in order to be able to utilize this gun and still make stats, you also have to include the Reap IR eye cup. So make sure that you have the eye cup along with this. Now, the KAC QDSS FDE suppressor is find and raid loot only. Luckily, it doesn't end up running all that expensive. It's only $26.5. Really, your cost, if you're trying to do this earlier, which you can't do this task until you're level 35, by the way, but if you're trying to do this earlier, the Reaper is going to be a pretty penny. It costs about $720K as of the recording of this video. Now, everything else is stuff that you can get off of the traders at level 35 without even breaking a sweat. But if you want to do this for something cheaper than $720K, and you want to try and do it for barters with things that you found along the way, you have a couple of options, but you won't be able to exercise them until you're level 40. So if you want to get this done at level 35, just keep in mind that you're going to have to pay cash for the Reaper if that's what you really want to do, or be one of the incredibly lucky people that finds it. Now, in the case of the barter, I'm just going to pull up the wiki page since I can't see it without having crowned traders, which I don't have in the case of Skier Mechanic as of yet. You can get this with 4 wooden clocks, 4 rollers, and 6 skull rings, or from Mechanic level 4, 5 iridium, 8 MCBs, and 2 filters. No matter what you do, this is going to be an expensive purchase. Depending on how you sit on this, either way, it could end up being less expensive. Right now, rollers are an incredibly high cost. You're going to be at least $450K or so into rollers just buying these 4 if you do that. So the Reaper, in this case, is kind of reflective of the cost of these valuables. I wish I could say that this task was overwhelmingly worth it. Your silver lining in this case is that the reward that you get for completing this task is an M4A1 Space Trooper, which contains a Reap IR on it. So at least then it becomes a zero-sum game, more or less, where you can take the Reaper and sell it back on the flea market if you want to reobtain, minus the fee for listing it, of course, the $720K or so that you had to spend on the Reaper in the first place. Other than that, you're really just looking at about 2,500 euros in your pocket and the satisfaction of knowing you're one step closer to the Kappa container. But that's it, guys. That's the entire series, start to finish. Thank you guys so much for coming and checking this out. Hopefully it was helpful to all of you. I had a lot of fun doing this and looking into it and helping all of you guys out. And I'll see you in the next video, okay? Sub the channel and like and subscribe and stuff. All right, see ya.